Here is a decision that most families make in a hurry, exhausted, frightened, and heartbroken, after a fall, a hospital stay, or a sudden decline that leaves no time for careful thought. Choosing a care home, for yourself or for someone you love, is one of the most important decisions a family ever faces. And yet it is so often made in crisis, with whatever bed happens to be available that week. Today, I want to share with you 7 things worth checking, calmly and in advance if at all possible, before anyone ever sets foot in a care home, so that if the day ever comes, you're choosing from wisdom rather than panic. Number 4 is the one families almost never think to ask, and yet it often matters more than almost anything else on this list. Let's walk through this together gently, because I know this is not always an easy subject. Before we begin, I want to say clearly that needing care, whether at home or in a residential setting, is never a failure, and choosing a good care home is an act of love, not abandonment. So many people carry a quiet guilt about this decision that simply isn't deserved. The goal of everything I'm about to share isn't to help you avoid care homes altogether, but to help you or your family choose well when and if the time comes, rather than settling for whatever's available in a moment of crisis. Number 1. Look beyond the brochure and visit unannounced. Every care home's official tour is, understandably, its very best foot forward, a carefully choreographed visit at a carefully chosen time. I think of a lady named Rosemary, searching for a home for her mother, who visited 3 homes on their official open days, all seemingly wonderful, and then returned to her top choice, unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon, finding a rather different atmosphere. Fewer staff, visible. Call bells ringing unanswered for some minutes. Residents left without much stimulation in a communal room, with the television simply left on. This isn't necessarily proof of a bad home. Staffing genuinely does fluctuate. But an unannounced visit tells you far more about the ordinary, unremarkable Tuesday reality of a place than any official tour ever will, and any good home should welcome this kind of visit without objection. Rosemary told me afterwards that the difference wasn't dramatic or shocking, nothing that would show up in a formal inspection, just a general sense of a Tuesday afternoon being genuinely ordinary, rather than performed, and that subtle difference between ordinary good and performed good turned out to matter enormously once her mother actually moved in. She also mentioned a smaller, easily overlooked detail from that unannounced visit. The smell of the place on an ordinary day, rather than a specially aired and freshened show day, which told her something honest about the standard of everyday housekeeping that no brochure photograph ever could. If a home genuinely operates well day to day, an unannounced visit simply confirms what the official tour already showed you. If it doesn't, that gap between the 2 visits is exactly the information you came looking for. Number 2. Ask directly about staff turnover and staffing ratios, not just qualifications. A care home can have wonderfully qualified staff on paper and still struggle badly if it can't retain them, because high turnover means residents are constantly cared for by unfamiliar faces who don't yet know their particular needs, preferences, and personality. I recall a gentleman named Cecil who specifically asked one home how long their care staff typically stayed, and was told, refreshingly honestly, that several members of staff had been there over 8 years, a sign of a genuinely well-run, well-treated team. Compare that with vague or evasive answers to the same question elsewhere, which tell their own story just as clearly. Ask, too, about the actual ratio of staff to residents, during the night, not just the day, since night staffing is often where corners get cut, and yet it's precisely when residents are often most vulnerable and least able to summon help quickly. Sassel's approach was worth noting for another reason too. He asked the same staffing question of 3 different people. During his visit, the manager, a care assistant he passed in a corridor, and a kitchen worker delivering afternoon tea, simply to see whether the answers matched. In one home, he considered, the manager's confident answer about generous night staffing didn't quite align with what a passing care assistant mentioned rather more candidly. And that small discrepancy was enough for him to look elsewhere. It isn't about catching anyone out dishonestly. Sometimes, staff genuinely don't know figures outside their own shift pattern. But asking the same question of several different people in several different roles tends to reveal a far more reliable picture than relying on a single polished answer from whoever happens to be leading your tour. Number 3, understand the full fee structure, including everything that isn't included in the headline price. Care home fees are notoriously complex, and the advertised weekly rate very often doesn't include everything you'll actually need. I think of a family who chose a home based on a fee that seemed entirely reasonable, only to discover afterwards that hairdressing, chiropody, certain toiletries, outings, and even extra laundry for particular fabrics all carried additional charges that added up to a genuinely significant sum each month beyond what they'd budgeted for. Ask specifically, in writing, exactly what the quoted fee covers and what it doesn't, and ask what happens to fees as care needs increase over time. Since many homes charge more as residents require additional support, sometimes substantially more, and you deserve to understand that trajectory clearly before you commit, rather than discovering it gradually through rising invoices. It's also worth asking specifically about the notice period and any deposit arrangements, since these vary considerably between homes and can matter enormously if circumstances change. Whether that means a health decline, requiring a move, dissatisfaction with the standard of care, or simply a shift in financial circumstances. Some homes require a substantial deposit and a lengthy notice period, effectively locking a family in for months, even if things aren't working out. Others operate far more flexibly. Neither approach is automatically wrong, but you deserve to know which one you're agreeing to before you sign anything, rather than discovering the terms only when you actually want to leave. A good independent financial advisor with specific experience in care fee planning can be worth their weight in gold here, helping a family understand not just this month's cost, but the realistic multi-year financial picture, including how savings, property, and any local authority contribution might interact over time. Number 4, and this is the one families almost never think to ask, and yet it often matters more than almost anything else on this list. What happens if care needs increase beyond what this particular home can provide? Many care homes are designed for a specific level of need, and if health declines significantly, perhaps requiring specialist nursing care or support for advanced dementia, some homes simply cannot continue to provide adequate care, meaning a second, often distressing move becomes necessary at precisely the moment when stability matters most. I knew a family whose father had to move homes twice within 18 months, as his needs changed, each move genuinely disorientating and difficult for a man already struggling with memory. Ask directly whether the home can support increasing needs over time, including specialist nursing or dementia care if that ever becomes relevant. or whether you should expect a further move down the line, so that you can weigh that real possibility into your decision from the very start, rather than being surprised by it later. There's a related question worth asking too. What specifically triggers a decision that a resident's needs have outgrown the home, and who makes that call? Some homes have clear, written thresholds. Others make the decision more informally, on a case-by-case basis, which can leave families feeling blindsided when the conversation eventually happens. A home willing to explain this process clearly and in advance, before you've even moved in, is generally telling you something reassuring about how transparently they'll communicate later, when the stakes are higher and emotions are running considerably hotter than they are during a calm initial visit. The family I mentioned, whose father moved twice within 18 months, told me the second move was noticeably easier than the first, not because the underlying decline was any less painful to witness, but because they'd learned from that first difficult experience exactly which questions to ask the second time round. They specifically sought out a home with an attached, higher-level nursing wing, so that any future decline could potentially be managed with a much smaller, less disruptive transition within the same building, and, crucially, among staff who already knew their father well. That single piece of foresight, born from an earlier hard lesson, spared the family a third difficult upheaval during a period that was already, in every other respect, exhausting enough. Number 5. Talk to current residents' families, not just the staff giving the tour. Nobody understands the genuine day-to-day reality of a care home better than the families of people already living there, and most good homes will happily put you in touch. Or you can simply ask a family member you notice visiting during your own tour. I think of a gentleman named Arthur, who struck up a brief conversation with a woman visiting her own mother, and learned more in 10 honest minutes about the home's actual character, warmth, and occasional frustrations than an entire hour with the marketing manager had told him. If a home seems reluctant to let you speak with existing families, or can't produce a single family willing to talk, treat that reluctance itself as useful information. Arthur later made a point of arranging a slightly longer visit specifically so he'd have time for these unplanned conversations, rather than rushing through a tightly scheduled official tour with no room for chance encounters. He suggested arriving a little early and simply sitting in a communal area for 10 minutes before your appointment begins, watching the ordinary rhythm of the place. And more often than not, finding a visiting family member happy to chat. Families who visit regularly tend to be remarkably candid, precisely because they have nothing to sell you and everything to gain from being honest with a stranger, walking the same difficult road they once walked themselves. Number 6. Check the most recent inspection report thoroughly, not just the overall rating. In the UK, care homes are inspected by the Care Quality Commission, and while the headline rating matters, the detailed report underneath it often tells a richer and more useful story, including specific areas of concern or particular strengths worth knowing about. I recall a family who nearly chose a home rated good overall until reading the full report revealed a specific, repeated concern about medication management that hadn't affected the overall rating enough to change the headline, but mattered enormously to their own father's complex medication needs. These reports are freely available online, and reading the full detail, not just the summary rating, takes perhaps 20 minutes and can reveal things that matter specifically to your own situation, even within an otherwise well-regarded home. It's worth reading not only the most recent report, but, where available, the 2 or 3 before it, because a single report is a snapshot, while a pattern across several visits over several years tells you something more reliable about whether a home is consistently well run or simply happened to perform well on one particular inspection day. A home showing steady improvement year on year tells a genuinely encouraging story. One that dips and recovers repeatedly or shows the same recurring concern mentioned more than once deserves a more searching conversation before you commit, regardless of how reassuring the most recent headline rating happens to look. Number 7. Ask how the home handles the emotional and social side of life, not just the physical care. Good physical care is essential, but it isn't sufficient on its own for genuine well-being. Ask what activities are actually offered, and, importantly, how many residents genuinely participate, rather than how many activities appear on a printed weekly schedule that may not reflect daily reality. Ask how the home handles residents' individual interests. Whether someone who loved gardening or music or a particular faith is helped to continue enjoying that part of themselves, or whether daily life becomes simply uniform for everyone, regardless of their personal history. I think of a lady named Joyce, a lifelong pianist, who thrived remarkably in a home specifically because a member of staff had taken the trouble to learn this about her and arranged regular time at an old upright piano in a quiet lounge, a small thing that made an enormous difference to her sense of remaining herself, rather than simply becoming a resident like any other. Now, having gone through all 7, let me offer a few gentle, practical thoughts for approaching this whole process. First, start looking before a crisis forces the decision, even if only in a general, unhurried way, so that if the need arises suddenly, you're choosing from genuine knowledge rather than whatever's available that particular week. Second, involve the person who may eventually need care in these conversations as much as possible, while they're able to participate, rather than deciding entirely on their behalf without their voice included. Third, trust your own instincts about the atmosphere of a place, the small, hard-to-articulate feeling of warmth or coldness that often tells you as much as any formal checklist. And fourth, remember that no home will be absolutely perfect on every single measure, and the goal isn't perfection, but finding somewhere that gets the things that matter most to your particular situation genuinely right. Let me close with a story that I think brings all of this together. A gentleman named Jeffrey researched care homes for nearly 2 years before his wife's dementia progressed to the point where residential care became necessary, visiting unannounced, speaking with families, reading every inspection report in full. When the time finally came, he told me the decision, though still emotionally difficult, felt entirely different from what he'd feared. Rather than a desperate scramble in crisis, it was simply the next calm step in a plan he'd already carefully laid. His wife settled into her new home within a fortnight, in no small part because Jeffrey had chosen somewhere that genuinely understood her, right down to the piano in the corner, and staff who'd been there for years and knew her by the time she arrived. I couldn't control what was happening to her mind, he told me. But I could control this one thing, and doing it properly, with time rather than panic, was the last real gift I could give her. If this spoke to you today, please subscribe, because every week I share these honest, gentle lessons for our later years, and I would love to have you along for the next one. And I would genuinely love to know in the comments whether you've had experience choosing a care home for yourself or a loved one, and what you learned along the way, because your experience might be exactly what helps someone else facing this same difficult decision. I read every single comment. Take good care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next one.